It's finally getting cold, and a lot of people like to cold weather camp, including myself. And so this is the time of year when we start using this furnace quite a bit. It keeps the underbelly warm, keeps your pipes from freezing and your tanks from freezing, keeps you from freezing in the RV. But if you're like me and you harvest host or you go off grid once in a while, there's a fatal mistake or a fatal flaw with these type of furnaces that will destroy itself if you use it in certain boondocking situations. Now I'm going to explain that and a few little tips when it comes to taking care of your furnace. But you're right here, I got something to show you. I think this will help explain it a whole lot better. This is a typical RV furnace. Now this particular furnace is a Dometic. It's actually an Atwood model that is now owned and made by Dometic. And it is very similar to a lot of furnaces you'll see in RVs, though there can be some differences. These furnaces are actually very, very simple and quite easy to work on if you can get to them. The hardest part is getting to them because they're often buried in your cabinets or far under your underbelly. But there's only a few things that they require to work properly. One, they need a very good 12-volt current. Two, they need good air intake and good air outtake. And third, they need fuel, which is your propane, and they need ignition. If you have those things, these things will generally run. And we'll go through the main things that go wrong with these and how while boondocking, this can leave you stranded if you're not careful. Hey, before we get into it, let's just kind of go over some of the parts that are inside this furnace. The first thing you have over here is you have a motherboard and etc. And this does things like causes some delays that we'll talk about in just a second, and it just timing, etc. that goes on, make sure things operate in the right order. You have a cell switch. This just makes sure you're having the right airflow going into the combustion chamber. That's a chamber right here. If you look in it, it has a bunch of pipes running through it. It looks kind of like an exhaust. You have a fan. You actually have two fans, but on this model they run off one motor. You have a fan that blows the heat from the flame into the exhaust, and you have a fan that blows air into the combustion chamber or the area around those pipes and then out through your ductwork to heat your camper. And of course you have your fuel intake where your propane comes in. You have your duct ports where you hook up your various ductwork. You need to make sure you always have at least the minimum required ducts that's required. This one had 4 ducts that were set up, but it's actually designed where you could have quite a bit more or different configurations. And then there's a thermostat, and it's just a simple little thermostat. And these things work in conjunction with each other just to make sure everything works. When you look at the wiring coming into this, the blue wires are generally from the thermostat. That's just going to tell you it's time to kick on the heater from your thermostat inside your unit. And the red is your positive 12 volt and the black is your negative 12 volt. Pretty easy to hook up and run. If you're testing it, you can always just hook up the black wire to your negative on your battery, red wire to your positive, and just put these 2 blue wires to each other, and now basically tell it the same thing it would do if the thermostat said it was time to run. Now, one of the things you'll notice when you look in here is in this particular model, there's actually plastic fans. And these fans, like I said, are serving 2 purposes. The bottom fan, which is right about here, is blowing air right where the flame comes, or where the propane has come in and is lit, and it's blowing that heat through these exhaust pipes that you can see right down in here. And that heat will come all the way around, and then it will blow out through an exhaust port on this side of the furnace going outside. A lot of people will say these furnaces will put humidity in the camper because they burn on propane, but all that burnt propane exhaust goes outside. There's no moisture coming from it, and that's why if you're outside, this is hot, don't touch it if you've been running your furnace. It's nice to stand next to on a cold day though. Fan on top of this motor right here, which comes up to about right here, it blows air into this cavity that the exhaust pipes go through. And it circulates around those pipes, it heats up the air, and then through the pressure, it's going out through your ductwork. Really simply how it all works. Now, let's go in the order it works. The thermostat tells it's time to kick on. So the fans start running. It waits till the cell switch lays flat, which allows the unit to know that there's enough airflow that it's safe to go ahead and ignite. Now, that's important because if there's not enough airflow, this would get too hot and be a danger to the camper and also a danger to the fan, which is something we're going to talk about in just a little bit. So once that cell switch once it's laid down it will ignite. Now there's a little ignition switch right behind here, right where the propane is coming in. So it lets the propane come in, and it has an ignition switch. If you're getting run but no light on your RV, you might want to check that ignition gap. Sometimes it can get dirt in it. It's generally a 1/8 gap. Just take a 1/8 drill bit, put it between the gap, and it should basically touch that drill bit with the drill bits fit between. And that's a cheap, easy way to check your gap. So once that triggers, it makes a spark that lights the propane. The fan, the bottom fan, is blowing that flame into this exhaust. And then the fan up here keeps running to run the air around the exhaust and through your camper, so you have heat going everywhere. Once it reached temperature, the thermostat, the little blue wires from the thermostat will say it's time to cycle off. The fan won't stop running though, because there's a delay switch on this motherboard right here. And what that delay switch does is it tells it when it's time to turn off. It cuts the propane, so there's no longer a flame, no longer more heat, but it continues to run so that it cools down the combustion chamber area. Otherwise, it will just get too hot. It needs to cool off, so you'll still have some warm air coming through your vents for a little while, even after you've heard that propane start burning. And that's probably a minute to 2 minutes, and then it turns off and everything's fine. It sits there till activated again. This is how it works. Generally speaking, the biggest problem with these furnaces, when people say my furnace isn't working, is it's not getting sufficient 12-volt current voltage. And that could be because your batteries are too low. That is the number one thing. This is a pretty significant fan. It's gonna hit, depending on the size of your unit, between 4 amps to 8 amps. So you can see how that could add up and actually burn your battery down pretty quickly. But if you have a low battery, it just won't be enough power to get this thing running. And that can be why it just won't start up, or it sounds like it's real weak trying to start up and just nothing happens. The second thing I'll hear people say is it started to run, it blew cold air, never blew warm air, and then turned off. That's normally a cell switch. Now the cell switch could either be defaulty, they can get dirty and just need to be cleaned off, or just worn out. They're easy to change. As a matter of fact, I carry a couple of them with me at all times because they're just real easy to change out. Or it could be it's getting insufficient airflow from this fan, the top fan, into this chamber to push the cell switch flat. And that could be because there's something stuck in the fan, there's dirt in the fan, but it also could just be that the fan itself is broken. And that's real important. You don't want to bypass the cell switch if you're not 100% sure that you're getting proper airflow through here. Because if you bypass the cell switch and you're not getting proper airflow, you have too hot of a box, and that's a fire hazard to your whole RV and safety. The other big thing people will say is, well, it's running, but I've checked the cell switch, it's fine. I don't understand, the airflow is fine, and it's never lighting. Well, that could either be you're not getting propane, which there could be air in your lines, or you could be out of propane. A lot of times what I'll tell people to do is turn on their stove for a little while and burn it, and that way if there was some air caught in the lines, you can burn it out through your stove top, your burners, and then try it again and see if that works. And that'll often fix it. If not that, and you're getting propane, then it may be that ignition space and gapping. It can get dirt in there too. A little piece of lint or something could keep it from making a spark, or the gap could just have gotten too wide. So literally you can pull that out, put your 1/8 drill bit in there, see if it fits right, clean it off, and push it. You can literally just bend those little thick prongs into the right position, put it back, and you'll generally be able to get a spark. Now, bigger issues could be a broken fan. These little plastic fans break all the time. You can have a clogged air. Your motherboard or delay switches can go out. Matter of fact, I actually have an extra motherboard. That way I don't even have to go through all these switches. I bought it fairly cheaply off Amazon. If I think I have trouble there, I'm just throw out the motherboard, throw in another one, and that way you're replacing everything at once and you're pretty good to go. I definitely carry a couple cell switches with me. Have come in handy once, but it's even come in more handy for fellow campers had their cell switch go out. So this is how these furnaces can break down on you and cause you a horrible problem when boondocking. Let me explain. You go out and let's say you have 200 amp hours of batteries. You may have a lot more, you may have a lot less. Let's just say 200 amp hours of battery. You think you have plenty of battery, but you're running all sorts of stuff, and you sit through the night, and your furnace is running at night while you're sleeping. It's doing great. But you've sucked a little more out of your battery than you intended, and your battery voltage falls too low to run this fan. In that scenario, the fan will just stop. but it hasn't had time to cool off the combustion chamber. So this is too hot. It hasn't had that safety time of the air flowing through here to cool it off. It's just abruptly stopped because it lost power. And this is so hot that without that airflow, it can melt. And it can melt and soften the fan. So now the fan has gotten soft and from being too hot. Now it could actually melt, but generally it won't melt, but it will make it more brittle. Then the next time you charge up your batteries and you turn on that fan, it will spin real hard when it first starts up, and it can literally spin the top off this plastic fan or the little pieces off. And it can get even worse because those little pieces will sometimes go into the combustion box and hit these exhaust pipes and melt and make horrible smells and be a disaster to clean up. And you're asking me how I know? Well, that's how I got this spare furnace. This one's been cleaned up. I've rebuilt it. It works great, but I originally took it out to do that because this is exactly the scenario that happened to me. And while researching, I found out this is a fairly common thing. You let your battery run down too low while boondocking or at a harvest host, the fan stops, box is still hot, it weakens your fan. And then when you go to use your fan later on, when you get on full hookups, whatever, and you spin that fan hard, it disintegrates and can cause all sorts of issues. It can be a fire hazard, everything else. So that's how you can actually destroy your heater when boondocking. And so all you have to do is make sure you're really watching your battery voltage, that you've got plenty of battery to run it, especially before you go to bed at night, because that's where it seems to happen, because you don't notice the battery's getting low because you're sleeping. That's all I'm really covering in this really short video about these heaters. They're really simple. They're easy to work on. They're nothing to be intimidated about. With just a little familiarization, you can probably change most of the parts on this thing, fix this thing. The hardest part is getting it in and out of your camper when they're in tight spots. But it's not that hard to do, and it's something I encourage you to familiarize yourself with. Also, you want to do some preventive maintenance. You want to make sure, like I was looking right here, there's actually a screw caught in this fan here. Don't know how that happened, but it looks like it happened while it was running. Make sure there's nothing caught in it. Make sure there's no dirt dauber nests. You'll want to take a flashlight and look at your motherboard. Just make sure nothing looks corroded. Everything looks good at least once or twice a year. Check your exhaust. You really don't want any lint or dog hair built up on these fans or on your cell switch. You can pop this cell switch out pretty easy. Check it out. You want to check your ignition for the same thing. If you're watching those things, you're checking the hose that comes in here with your propane. Make sure it's not chafed and stuff. These things will last you a while. You just got to take care of them. And if it does have an issue or problem, you don't have to throw it out. You can fix it. You can get all these parts and fix it fairly easy. But hope that saves somebody.